You're rolling everywhere, Luke.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. So today, we're going to be doing a little bit of a science project. Well, not exactly. We're going to be doing some scientific, semi-scientific things with the new Z Fold 4, which is the device that has been in my pocket since it arrived here in studio. I'm into the folding thing, I admit it. But I noticed right away that there were some differences between the Z Fold 4 and the Z Fold 3.
Yeah.
The display brightness, the appearance of it in general. So Samsung reached out and they said, why don't we do a video on the actual display technology? Hey, why is that display so bright, so vivid? What's going on with these folding displays? Because when you boost that brightness on a Z Fold 4, you are blown away. So what are we gonna do today in order to figure this all out? Well, first things first, I ordered this screen luminance meter. This thing is supposedly gonna tell us, look at that, how bright the display is. Maybe we'll use this in future videos. And I've also got this kind of like a macro effect. A loop! It's called a loop, a magnifying device so that we can examine the subpixels. These gadgets are gonna help us inspect why that's the case. First major technology in these OLED displays, Square OLED Plus. This is Samsung's display technology that removes the polarizer film from the OLED. This reduces reflections from external light and then integrates its functionality into the panel layer. So new for this device in 2022, it features an even more advanced light transmittance technology and displays brighter images, and they're claiming a 68% transmittance rate, which is a significant improvement over a conventional OLED where the transmittance amount is more like 43%. Now, the other thing about the displays is that they are designed based on how the human eye perceives colors and images. See, human eyes are more sensitive to green light compared to red and blue. The new technology selectively increases the transmittance of red and blue subpixels. Then it blocks reflections of the bottom electrode compared to conventional displays. So by increasing the transmittance of the colors that our eyes are less sensitive to, we're able to see a more vibrant representation. There's a big aspect here which has to do with battery conservation, energy efficiency. It'll reduce power consumption in some cases by up to 37%. Max out your screen brightness or use it at a brighter level than you normally would without the same impact or hit to battery life. So normally you would have some sort of a notch or something for the front-facing camera. Then we move to hole punches, punch holes, and this is the latest technology, which is hiding it right underneath the display and pixels that are capable of being turned off. It's an uninterrupted display hiding the camera right underneath the OLED panel. An uninterrupted display, you have less distraction, you have fewer things in the way of the content that you're trying to look at, and this does create a situation where it just fades away a little bit more. It's not that it's completely invisible, but you just don't notice it as much. But on the latest generation, the Z Fold 4, it's been upgraded. First generation UPC technology has multiple pixel clusters that behave like a single large pixel, resulting in a lower perceived resolution. So essentially what this means for your perception or your perceived resolution is more dots, and more dots makes things look sharper. Previously, it might have looked a little bit like, I don't know, a digital clock or something with giant block-like pixels. The perception now is much finer dots, which allows it to blend into the display better. Now, the last thing worth talking about with folding displays, one of the big apprehensions is around durability.
384, 385, 386, 387, 388.
The new one has been tested in a number of extreme circumstances. Samsung Display has now received certification that guarantees folding more than 200,000 times at room temperature and 150,000 times at high temperature, which is very high based on their testing. They said 60 degrees Celsius. Sounds like Kuwait. The temperature is above 40 C 165 days per year as of 2021. No concerns here. I'll be folding 200,000 times. If you're a heavy user and you fold and unfold 200 times per day, that's equivalent to 150,000 times in 4.5 years. In Kuwait, I don't think I even do it 200 times. I don't think I do it 200 times. You know what? Everyone always underestimates this. 100 open and close max would be my guess.
417, 418, 419.
But it's just a guess. Now, what about extreme cold? Don't want to leave the cold out. They do have a study facility in Antarctica. There's just cold places, all right? So this foldable display is certified for 30,000 times at extreme cold, -20 Celsius. -20 is... You got guys like Jack that was living in Winnipeg for a minute. Shout out Winnipeg. All right, so we've already done an unboxing of this because obviously it's in my pocket and obviously it's my daily driver and I've been driving it. We do, however, have a fresh one. I'm just going. Blam, it turns orange. And then you know you're in business. I knew, my retinas knew that something had changed. And so I bought this in order to maybe, hopefully, put a number to that. Okay. All right, so I did a little bit of research here. This thing is measuring in CD/M squared. Some people measure in nits or talk about nits when they're discussing brightness. Here's the premise. Samsung doesn't want a folding display to be a huge compromise when compared to a traditional OLED. Measurements for brightness are out there. I learned a few things upon reading some of those measurements if you want to get a maximum brightness reading. On this phone, if you go into settings, obviously you have your brightness meter, you have an adaptive brightness button, which I'm going to turn off, but then you have an extra brightness button after adaptive brightness is turned off. However, most smartphones that I've tested have actually exhibited even more brightness if they're in adaptive mode and exposed to sunlight. Indoors, you normally don't even get this extra brightness setting, but Samsung gives it to you. Now, when you toggle the extra brightness setting, by the way, luminance meter pointed at the table, CD/M2 squared 0, I put it on the display, 745 with that extra brightness toggle. However, if I was to take this outdoors in adaptive mode and let it automatically adjust, then I could get a maximum reading close to 1000. Now you might be saying, what do I need to know about maximum brightness here? What is the advantage when you're competing with a bunch of natural light? That's one thing. But also when you're competing with reflections and glare and, I don't know, when you're watching a movie and you want that really vibrant contrast and saturation with colors and so forth. How does this compare to other flagships? Well, we do have some readings that have been recorded. One of the brightest flagships out there in maximum auto isn't all that different than this folding display, and that also comes from Samsung themselves. The S22 Ultra, which in a max auto type scenario, in adaptive, exposed to sunlight, can get around 1200 CD/M squared. In this setting here, you can see we can measure around 750. However, depending on the backdrop and the scenario, this setting here can get around 800. One of the reasons that manufacturers have things split up in this way is obviously to do with battery consumption. And also the fact that you probably just don't need that kind of insane brightness when you're in a dark environment. So you have to go to adaptive, can sense the surroundings. But it's good to know because some people prefer to have manual brightness settings. But if you're out in direct sunlight with manual brightness settings, you're actually not using as much brightness as your device is capable of. Now, what about me? What about the guy who was using the Z Fold 3 for an extended period of time and enjoying it? And I don't know, I'm sort of feeling like a convert at this point. I don't have that extra brightness setting. I only have my toggle or the adaptive mode. And my toggle does go into the orange section of extra bright. It is set to vivid. Okay, this is not exactly a fair test because we have that extra toggle on the newer software over here. Manually, this is pretty much as bright as we can get, which is actually not far off from the suggested reading of 489. But the Z Fold 3 is capable of getting quite bright in sunlight on the auto adaptive mode. It can reach around 920 CD/M squared. But nonetheless, Samsung continues to iterate and improve on their technologies with each generation. And if there was apprehension for you around the performance of a folding OLED from Samsung, there really shouldn't be from a brightness perspective because of the fact that you've got flagship characteristics and you have readings for brightness that are very similar to traditional OLED, even though in this case, we're capable of folding it. Okay, now next up, let's see if we can examine these subpixels in order to see that representation of red and blue subpixels. Oh, baby, there we go. The blue dots in the subpixels, the blue dots are much bigger. The layout is kind of interesting. I'm assuming that Mo's gonna be able to get a shot of this, although it's difficult because you're gonna have to look through the loop. So if you've never stared at a display with a loop, then you have no idea what I'm looking at, but Mo's gonna try to show you. It will showcase the subpixel pattern on the display, including those large blue segments and those quad green sections. Very vibrant. You get a whole different appreciation. Like it's a white display that appears to be, well, obviously so much more complex. So hopefully what you can see through this magnification with the loop is the increased brightness of red and blue. It's funny, they have an example here of a green exit sign on a highway, and it seems that they're implying that the reason they're green is because they're easier for us to see. Let's talk UPC real quick. I am not a huge selfie guy. The old tech, which is not that old, we're talking one generation ago, you would have something that looks like perceived resolution that's low. The new one has a much higher perceived resolution, which blends with the display in a greater way. So during normal daily operation, this section is going to blend and sort of fade away. And the previous generation kind of did the same thing, but alongside the perception of a lower resolution section of screen. Either way, this tech makes the front-facing camera less of an obstruction. And the thing to remember with these folding devices is you still have your external display and your front-facing camera that lives over there. So that's obviously a focus on some of Samsung's latest display tech. Sometimes there's things going on under the hood that you might not necessarily know about. You might look at it and say, wow, that's really impressive, or that's a nice looking screen, but you might not really know why that's the case or what's going on to make it that way. Brightness is a thing that most of us can perceive, but we don't often have a chance to compare it to other devices that are on the market or to know how much of an improvement has been made. Battery life is something that everybody wants, so any technology that can increase light transmittance and therefore limit battery consumption is something that people are gonna want across all smartphones. And then lastly, this improvement in UPC, or cameras that are hidden underneath the OLED display. This is an area that many were skeptical about, but it also continues to improve with each generation. And my guess is eventually all front-facing cameras use some version of this technology because there's obvious advantages when you're viewing multimedia and it doesn't have to act as a distraction. All right, so there you have it. Samsung display tech. There's a reason that Samsung is a leader in the space. It's because they continue to innovate around these technologies, even though you might not notice it. Each generation has something new or has some type of improvement, whether that's in a Samsung phone or some other phone brand that happens to use Samsung displays.